Hi, welcome to the first of 3 sessions with me, Chris, from Wild Elements, where we'll be looking at the science of flight. For the 3 sessions, we will be looking at the science of flight. For the first session, we'll be looking at different types of planes. The second session, we'll be looking at birds and how they've adapted to fly. And for the third session, we will be looking at aerodynamics, and we'll be making different paper aeroplanes to illustrate the aerodynamics need for flight. For today's session, we will be looking at different types of aircraft. Then we will move on to the history of flight, how it came about, and to finish off, we'll be looking at pioneers and record breakers for flight. Also, in today's session, we will be performing an experiment that looks at the 4 forces of flight. In the front of your workbooks, you will see that there are many types of aircraft, different uses, military or civilian, and also different shapes and sizes. The shape and size of an aircraft is important to its use. Did you know that there are some aeroplanes that are so big that they can carry submarines or tanks and all kinds of different things? Development of flying was not easy, and you can see this through the videos that we have provided. Let's move on to some of the experiments now to illustrate the 4 forces of flight. For our first experiment to look at the 4 forces, you will need 1 piece of paper and a pen. So let's first take a look at gravity. If I hold this pen out, what do you expect to happen? Do you expect it to fly, hover, or drop? Well, as you expected, the pen dropped. This is gravity. But what is gravity? Gravity is the force pulling us down on an object's weight. For the next force that we need to look at, we are going to look at thrust. So if I jump up and down, why did I come back down? How did I jump up? What were my legs doing? Have a think about what is involved to make myself jump. Now, when you jump, try not bending your legs. So, what exactly were my legs doing to make me jump? When I was jumping, I was bending my legs to make my body into a position to thrust myself into the air. And it is this thrust that is exactly the same force that aeroplanes need to move forward through the air. Thrust is also the same force used for rockets to get them off the launch pad and into space. One of the other things that scientists needed to understand was how to overcome the weight. Thrust alone is not enough for an aeroplane. It needs to be able to create lift. Lift is the force that acts opposite to gravity. Okay, for this experiment we will just need a piece of paper on the desk flat. For the first part, we need to blow down on the piece of paper What has happened? Well, as you can see, nothing, because blowing down on top of the piece of paper is the larger surface area and it is flat agreeing to the ground. Therefore, we will not be able to create any lift with this. So to create lift, we need to create a bit of pressure from our mouth and blow towards the piece of paper. To create lift, the air pressure needs to be able to travel under the piece of paper and over the paper at the same time. This is how lift is created. As you can see from me blowing on the piece of paper, the air pressure was able to get underneath the piece of paper and lift it off the table and make it move. This is exactly how lift works. You can see from that experiment that in order to create lift, the surface area needs to be on a thinner plane. That way, the air pressure is able to move over the top and underneath the piece of paper. Therefore, that created the lift. For the final exercise in this experiment, we'll be looking at the force drag. Drag is the opposite effect to thrust. So what happens with drag? Drag essentially is friction. Friction is when two substances try to slide across each other. If you rub your hands together, the friction in your hands will warm your hands up. It is the same principle as when an aircraft is trying to fly through the air. How does the friction happen? Well, the air molecules like oxygen and nitrogen that are in our atmosphere all bump against an aircraft's body as it tries to fly through the air, and it is this friction that causes an aeroplane to slow down, and this is what is known as drag. Let's take a look at how drag works. For this part, once again, you'll need a piece of paper. First, I want you to put your arm out to the side and then move it forwards, slowly and then fastly. Slowly and then fastly. What you will notice is that there is not much resistance or friction from the air against your hand. So how do we increase this? Well, the first thing we need to do is increase the surface area. This is where our piece of paper comes in. Here's the piece of paper. So if we hold the piece of paper in your hand at arm's length and then slowly move it forwards, you should be able to feel ever so slightly a little bit of pressure against your hand from the piece of paper. Now let's try this faster. And again. So what could you see happen to the piece of paper? Well, the piece of paper, as I was moving my hand forward slowly, was staying to my hand, where if I just held it out like that, it drops, it flies away. So it was the force of drag that is actually holding the piece of paper in my hand. The way this works is that because there's a larger surface area from the piece of paper, that means that it's having to push more air out of its way to move forwards. And it's the same principle that causes drag. The larger a vehicle, the more drag it has. For many years, scientists did not realise that there were four forces involved in flight. However, it wasn't until a man named George Cayley that discovered the four forces of flight. He is also known as the father of aviation. However, he wasn't the first man to design planes or aircraft. One of the first ever designs that we know about was by a man called Da Vinci. And since the invention of the aeroplane, there have been many pioneers and record breakers setting world records for, say, flying across the Atlantic or the Pacific or around the globe, and you can find these people in your workbook. The fundamental thing with flight is that all scientists look towards nature to learn how to create flight. And that is what we're going to look at in our next session, how birds fly.